My name is Claire Pierce. I'm 32, and for most of my life, I've been the family's emergency contact, unpaid accountant, and emotional shock absorber. If my mom could sum me up in one word, it would be responsible. If I could sum up my family in one word, it would be expensive. I work as an operations manager for an international logistics company. Shipments, spreadsheets, deadlines. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The 25th wedding anniversary gala was designed to look like a fairy tale, but it smelled like a transaction. The air in the country club ballroom was heavy with the scent of white lilies and expensive perfume. My mother, Melissa, stood at the center of the room in a silver gown that cost more than my first car, accepting compliments with the practiced humility of a woman who believes she owns the world. My father, David, stood beside her, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. They looked like the perfect power couple. They looked untouchable. I stood by a marble pillar, nursing a glass of sparkling water, watching them. I wasn't there to celebrate. I was there to witness the transaction I knew was coming. It happened at 8:42. I watched my mother leaning close to my father. Her lips barely moved, a whisper masked by the applause for the string quartet. My father nodded once, a sharp military jerk of his chin. He pulled his phone from his tuxedo pocket and typed a single message. Across the room, my brother Matthew's phone screen lit up. He checked it, buttoned his jacket, and slipped out the side exit without saying a word to his date. It was clumsy tradecraft. They thought they were invisible because they were wealthy. They thought I was just the helpful daughter too busy managing the logistics of the catering staff to notice the machinery of their betrayal turning. They were wrong. 12 minutes later, my clutch vibrated against my hip. It wasn't a text message or a call. It was a specific rhythmic pulse. The silent alarm from my downtown condo. I didn't gasp. I didn't drop my glass. I didn't run to my parents, begging for an explanation. I felt a cold, metallic calm settle over me. I turned my back to the room and slid my phone out. The security app opened instantly, streaming a live high-definition feed from the camera hidden in my home office. There he was, Matthew, the golden child. He wasn't using a key. He was using a crowbar on the interior door of my office. The wood splintered and he stepped inside. He wasn't looking for jewelry or cash. In his left hand, he carried a heavy industrial-grade degaussing magnet. He wasn't there to steal files. He was there to destroy them. He was there to wipe the servers that held the evidence of $4.2 million in embezzled charity funds. Most people would panic seeing their brother break into their sanctuary with the intent to destroy their livelihood. I just felt my pulse steady at 60 beats per minute. This wasn't a break-in. It was a confirmation. For months, I had suspected that when the walls started closing in, they would sacrifice me to save themselves. Now I had it in 4K resolution. I watched him reach for the dummy server tower I had left on the desk. He was exactly where I needed him to be. I didn't call the police. I didn't need to. I had prepared for this moment with the same precision I applied to my logistics spreadsheets. I opened a secure messaging app and typed a command to the private investigator and the off-duty officers waiting in the unmarked van in the alleyway behind my building. Execute the raid. I slid the phone back into my purse. Across the ballroom, my mother caught my eye. She smiled a tight, triumphant little curve of her lips. She thought she had won. She thought the loose end was being tied up. I smiled back, picked up a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The bubbles tasted sharp and cold. It was the taste of a trap snapping shut. I didn't need to guess why my parents had done it. I had the receipts, literally. 6 months ago, I had stayed late at the Foundation's office preparing for the annual audit. The books were a mess, intentionally complex, layered with transfers between shell companies and consulting firms that had no employees. I was tired. I just wanted to balance the ledger and go home to my son. But one number kept snagging my eye. A recurring transfer of $85,000 to a vendor listed as CP Consulting. The initials were mine, but I had never seen a dime of that money. I dug deeper. It wasn't just one transfer. It was years of them. My name, my social security number, My signature forged on documents, creating a shadow company that had siphoned $4.2 million out of the charity. I remembered the day I confronted them. It was a Tuesday morning. I laid the spreadsheets on my father's mahogany desk. He didn't look up from his newspaper. My mother, arranging flowers by the window, just sighed. "You don't understand high-level finance, Claire," she had said, her voice dripping with that patronizing sweetness she reserved for dismissal. "We're protecting your inheritance. We're managing these assets for your own good to minimize tax liability. You should be thanking us. Thanking them for stealing from a nonprofit, for making me an accessory to federal crimes, for using my identity as a shield." "I want it stopped," I had said. "And I want the money returned." "Don't be dramatic," my father had snapped, then finally looking at me. "We control the money because we know how to use it. You're just operational. You handle the small stuff. Leave the strategy to us." That was the moment the illusion broke. For 32 years, I thought their control was a form of love. A suffocating, heavy, critical kind of love, but love nonetheless. I thought they managed my finances and critiqued my spending because they wanted me to be secure. I was wrong. It wasn't protection. It was ownership. They didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as a resource, an asset to be utilized, depleted, and eventually, when the liability became too high, liquidated. They had framed their financial abuse as parental care so successfully that even I, the operations manager, who could spot a supply chain inefficiency from a continent away, hadn't seen the shackles until they were already rusted shut around my wrists. But I saw them now, and I had the key. Back in the ballroom, the applause was fading. My mother, flushed with the adoration of the crowd, stepped up to the microphone. The spotlight caught the diamonds at her throat, making them blaze. She cleared her throat, a delicate practice sound designed to command silence. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate 25 years of building something truly special," she began, her voice warm and rich like melted chocolate. "When David and I started the Pierce Family Foundation, we had a simple vision: to leave the world better than we found it, to build a legacy of integrity and service." My phone buzzed in my hand. A text from my mother. "Smile, Claire. You look miserable. People are watching." I looked up. She was beaming at the audience, the picture of maternal grace, while her thumbs tapped out a command under the podium. "And of course," she continued, gesturing vaguely in my direction without actually making eye contact, "we couldn't do it without our family, my son Matthew, who is working tirelessly behind the scenes even tonight to ensure our future is secure." A ripple of polite applause. Matthew wasn't working. He was breaking and entering. But to them, his absence was just another sign of his dedication, his importance. "And our daughter Claire," she added, her tone shifting slightly, becoming thinner, more patronizing. "Our little helper, always there to handle the details so the rest of us can focus on the big picture." Our little helper. The phrase hung in the air, sweet and poisonous. It was a dismissal dressed up as praise. It was a reminder of my place. I wasn't the architect. I was the janitor. I was the one who swept up the mess so they could keep walking on clean floors. I looked down at my phone. The notification from the security app was still there, frozen on the last frame of the live feed before the connection cut out. Matthew, crowbar in hand, reaching for the server. They thought they had won. They thought the evidence was gone, wiped clean by their golden boy. They thought they were untouchable, protected by their money and their reputation and their sheer unadulterated arrogance. They were celebrating their victory over me. They were toasting to my destruction. But then a new notification slid onto the screen. It wasn't from my mother. It was from the private investigator. Subject detained. PD on site. Evidence secured. The breath I hadn't realized I was holding rushed out of me. The noise of the ballroom, the applause, the music, the chatter faded into a dull roar. The world narrowed down to the glowing text on my screen. It was done. I looked up at the stage. My mother was still smiling, basking in the applause, her hand resting on my father's arm. They looked perfect. They looked invincible. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the helper, the fixer, the spare part. I felt powerful. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I wasn't the emotional shock absorber. I was the witness. I set my glass down on a passing tray. I smoothed the front of my dress. And then, with the calm, measured steps of a woman who knows exactly where she is going, I started walking toward the stage. I didn't make a scene. I didn't scream. I simply tapped my father on the shoulder, right between the shoulder blades of his custom-tailored tuxedo. When he turned, annoyed at the interruption, I leaned in and whispered 5 words. "The police have the drives." The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a time-lapse of a wilting flower. He grabbed my mother's arm, his grip hard enough to bruise, and steered us toward the private cloakroom off the main hall. The room was quiet, insulated by rows of mink coats and cashmere wraps. It smelled of cedar and panic. My mother, Melissa, smoothed her skirt, her eyes darting to the door to make sure no one had followed. "What did you do, Claire?" she hissed. "Where is your brother?" "Matthew is currently in the back of a squad car," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Flat, professional, detached. It was the voice I used for firing incompetent vendors. He tripped the silent alarm I installed 3 weeks ago. "The police have the magnets. They have the crowbar. You called the police on your own brother." My father's voice rose, a mix of disbelief and fury. "We were protecting this family. We were protecting you. Protecting me." I opened my clutch and pulled out the folded summary from the private investigator. I handed it to him. "I know about the embezzlement, Dad. I know about the $4.2 million, but that's not what killed us. That's just theft." I watched his eyes scan the paper. I watched the exact moment he realized I knew the rest. "The investigator didn't just catch Matthew trying to wipe the drives," I said, my gaze shifting to my mother. "He found the upload queue on Matthew's laptop, a folder titled Project Claire. You weren't just erasing the evidence. You were planting new files. You were backdating digital signatures to my user account. You were creating a paper trail that led directly to my desk." My mother froze. She didn't deny it. She didn't gasp. She just went very, very still. That was the kill shot. For years, I thought I was the disappointment. I thought I was the spare heir, the one they kept around because I was useful. But I was wrong. I wasn't just useful. I was their insurance policy. They had groomed me for this. They had put me in operations, kept me in the details, made sure my name was on the compliance forms, not to teach me the business, but to ensure that when the house of cards fell, I would be the one buried in the rubble. They were going to send me to federal prison for 20 years to save their reputation and Matthew's Senate run. It wasn't a tragedy. It was a liquidation strategy. We had to have a contingency, my father stammered, the bluster gone, replaced by a desperate, sweating bargaining. "Claire, listen. We can fix this. We have lawyers. We can say it was a mistake. We can pay you. How much do you want? 2 million? 5. I looked at them, these 2 people who had given me life, and then calculated exactly how much it was worth to trade it in. "You can't pay me," I said, "because I'm not your employee anymore, and I'm not your daughter." I took a step back toward the door. "I'm the state's witness, and I've already sent copies of everything to the district attorney." For a moment, the only sound in the cloakroom was the muffled bass of the band playing in the ballroom. A dull rhythmic thumping that felt like a dying heartbeat. My mother, Melissa, looked at the door, then back at me. Her face, usually a mask of composed elegance, began to fracture. It wasn't a slow crumble. It was a sudden, violent disintegration. You gave them the files," she whispered. Her voice was high and thin like a wire pulled until it snapped. "You gave them us." "I gave them the criminals," I corrected. "I just happened to share a last name with them." This was the moment I had prepared for. I had expected rage. I had expected the towering, terrifying anger that had defined my childhood, the cold silences, the sharp criticisms that could peel the skin off your self-esteem. But I wasn't seeing rage. I was seeing something far more pathetic. I was watching a narcissist collapse. When a person who builds their entire reality on control suddenly loses it, they don't reflect. They short-circuit. My mother didn't look at me and see a human being she had hurt. She saw a tool that had malfunctioned. She saw a possession that had engaged in rebellion. "You ungrateful little brat," she shrieked, lunging forward. My father caught her by the waist, holding her back. "After everything we gave you, the condo, the job, We made you a liability, I said calmly. And then you tried to write me off. Her aggression evaporated as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a frantic, terrifying desperation. She slumped against my father, tears cutting tracks through her heavy foundation. It was a performance, but it was also real fear. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying for the Gala, for the reputation, for the life that was dissolving second by second. "Claire, baby, please," she sobbed, reaching out a trembling hand. The switch was so jarring, it was almost nauseating. "We can fix this. We're a family. You can't send your own mother to prison. Think about what people will say. Think about the foundation." I watched her with the detachment of an auditor reviewing a fraudulent ledger. This was the mechanism of her control, the rapid cycling between predator and victim. If she couldn't intimidate me, she would try to consume me with guilt. She needed me to be the emotional shock absorber one last time. She needed me to absorb the consequences of her crimes so she could remain pristine. "The foundation is a crime scene, Mom," I said. "And I'm done cleaning it up." I turned to the door. "No," she screamed, dropping to her knees. The silk of her dress pulled around her on the dusty floor. It was a grotesque tableau of fallen royalty. "You can't leave us. You'll be alone. Claire, do you hear me? No one will want you. You'll be an orphan." I stopped. My hand hovered over the brass handle of the door. The threat hung in the air, the ultimate fear they had instilled in me since birth. That their conditional love was the only oxygen I would ever get. I looked back at them. My father gray and sweating, leaning against the wall for support. My mother, a weeping heap on the floor, mourning her power, not her child. They looked like strangers. "I've been an orphan for years," I said, my voice quiet and final. "I just didn't know it until tonight." I opened the door and stepped out. The cool air of the hallway hit my face. Behind me, the muffled sounds of my mother's wailing were swallowed by the heavy wood of the door as it clicked shut. I walked down the corridor, past the unsuspecting guests, past the celebration of a lie. And then I heard it in the distance, growing louder over the music, rising above the applause. The sirens. It was 3 weeks later. The morning sun was pale and clean, filtering through the blinds of my downtown condo. The apartment was quiet. No buzzing phone. No gala invitations. No emergency texts demanding I fix a crisis I didn't create. I sat at my kitchen table watching my son Ethan eat pancakes. He was 5 and he approached breakfast with the serious dedication of a craftsman, carefully drowning each bite in syrup. He looked up, a smudge of sticky sweetness on his chin. "Mom, is Grandma coming over today?" The question hung in the air, innocent and heavy. "No, honey," I said, pouring myself more coffee. "Grandma and Grandpa aren't going to be visiting for a while." "Are they in timeout?" I smiled. It was the simplest, truest explanation I had heard yet. The fallout had been swift and total. The arrests at the gala had made the front page of every paper in the state. Prominent philanthropists indicted in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. My brother Matthew had been denied bail, a flight risk, the judge said, given the offshore accounts. My parents were under house arrest, their assets frozen, their passports seized. Their lawyers were already trying to cut deals, turning on each other like rats in a sinking ship. I had been cleared. The files I handed over were exhaustive. The forensic accountants had spent days marveling at the meticulous record-keeping of my own framing. I had done my job too well, even when I was documenting my own destruction. I picked up my phone. I opened my contacts list and scrolled down to the group labeled family. It was the thread where the demands came from, where the guilt trips were launched, where the silence was weaponized. I tapped edit, then delete group. The names vanished. It wasn't a grand gesture. There was no applause, just a small digital emptiness where a burden used to be. I looked back at Ethan. He was happy. He was safe. He would grow up knowing that mistakes have consequences, that truth matters, and that love isn't something you have to buy with your silence or your soul. My parents had taught me that relationships were transactional. They taught me that value was calculated on a balance sheet. But sitting there in the quiet sunlight, I realized I was teaching my son something different. I was teaching him that love is just love, unconditional, safe, and never ever for sale. "Hey," I said. Ethan looked up. You want another pancake? Yes, please. I stood up and walked to the stove. The batter sizzled as it hit the pan, a cheerful, promising sound. Life went on. The world kept turning. And for the first time in 32 years, the ground beneath my feet felt solid. Have you ever had to choose between your family and your integrity? Tell me your story in the comments. And if you made it this far, hit follow because we're just getting started.